Hello, my name is Dan and welcome to New Frame Plus. It's time to talk about another one of the 12 principles of animation. We've talked about timing and we've talked about squash and stretch, and today is a special day because we're going to look at one of my favorite principles and one of the most important for video games, anticipation. If you have watched any of the other videos on this channel before, you've probably heard me use this term at least once. Anticipation is the preparation for the main action. It's the crouch that comes before the big jump. It's the wind-up before the pitch. It's something that accompanies almost every action you can think of, and it serves two important functions in animation. First of all, it helps to sell the physicality and power of an action. For an animated action to look right, it has to have convincing body mechanics and a sense of weight, and those things are often conveyed through the anticipating action. Like, try to imagine a free runner jumping from one platform to another without first bending their knees to maximize the power of the jump. Imagine a golfer trying to drive the ball down the fairway without first taking a nice big backswing. Or a pitcher throwing the baseball without that wind-up. Those actions would all look unrealistic and just bizarre without their anticipating actions. The preparatory movements are what convey the power, and the more powerful the action, the more exaggerated that anticipation needs to be. But anticipation also serves another crucial purpose. It helps an action to read better. Anticipation helps to guide the audience's eye and prepare us for what's about to happen. When we see that pitcher wind up, we can already tell what they're about to do. When we see a Looney Tunes character take a few steps back and coil up with their foot raised, we can already predict that they're about to sprint off screen at top speed. With a good anticipation, you should be able to cut to black right before the action happens and still know exactly what that character was about to do. Anticipation can also be a great way to create contrast when you really want to emphasize an action. Say you're animating a cartoony character and you want to make them react strongly to something, like they're suddenly surprised. Now, obviously, you want to have them do a big bug-eyed expression, but that reaction will feel even bigger if you first have them scrunch their face up for a frame or two, just to maximize the change. Anticipation's a great tool in any animated medium, but it's one of the most important principles for games, because players aren't just passively observing the movement of characters on screen. We often have to respond to it. We need visual cues to react to, and anticipation provides them. How do we know that the huge monster's about to attack? Because we see the wind-up, which gives us the chance to predict what's coming next and hopefully allows us just enough time to get away. A lot of action games are built around the idea of reacting to your opponent's tells, of recognizing the incoming attack just quickly enough to dodge out of the way, maybe even to respond with a counterattack. Some games, like Sekiro, demand even more precision, requiring that you not only recognize that the incoming attack is coming, but also deliver a specific, precisely timed response. This sort of game requires very well-crafted anticipating actions. The Sekiro's animators and designers had to do endless frame-by-frame tuning of all the attack animations for every enemy in that game, because they had to ensure that each attack was A, visually clear enough to see coming, and B, visually distinct enough to be identified and appropriately responded to. If those animated anticipations weren't clear, the entire game's combat system simply would not work. But this can all get a little bit tricky when it comes to animating the player character, because when the player hits a button, they generally want the associated action to happen quickly. Many of the best feeling games to control are the ones where it seems like actions come out nearly instantaneously, where the player character responds immediately to your inputs. Like, when you press the attack button in a Smash Bros. Game, your hit will often land like 1/10 of a second later. Now, that leaves almost no time at all for an anticipation, but if you play Smash Bros., you know how responsive those characters feel. Of course, not every genre of game demands that kind of instantaneous action. In slower-paced action games like Dark Souls or Monster Hunter, your player character's attacks will often have much lengthier wind-ups, and having to factor in that anticipation time forces players to choose the timing of their attacks more strategically. Or in a turn-based RPG or an RTS or any other genre where the player isn't controlling the characters directly, well, in those cases, responsiveness isn't nearly so big a concern, which means that there's a lot more wiggle room on animation length. But more often than not, when it comes to player characters, responsive controls take priority. So the game animator just isn't gonna have the luxury of giving each action quite as much anticipation as we'd like, which means that we've got to look for other ways to sell the power of the player character's actions. One common strategy is to extend an action's recovery time rather than its wind-up. This can help to visually convey the exertion and the power of an action without costing additional time in the anticipation phase. Now, in terms of realistic physicality, it's no replacement for a good anticipation, but in terms of game feel, it does get the job done. And as a bonus, it gives the designers a handy method of building risk and reward into your moveset, with more powerful actions leaving you vulnerable for a longer time afterward. Another approach that animators often take is to try to sneak an anticipation pose into the earliest frames of an action. Just enough time to reap some of the benefits without having to lose too much responsiveness. Like, when you press the jump button in Anthem, it may only last a few frames, but your javelin will sneak in a quick crouch before jumping, which adds some nice springiness to the launch. When Mario throws his cap, he instantly snaps to this wind-up pose and begins his twirl, which itself actually functions as a kind of visual anticipation before the actual throw. But sometimes that window is so tight that the animators can only sneak in the feeling of an anticipation pose. Like, the jumping animation in Celeste has 0 time for an anticipation. Literally 0. When that jump input gets received, Madeline is up in the air next frame. So, since an anticipating crouch is out of the question, the animator instead has her sprite do an exaggerated stretch as she lifts off, which sort of subconsciously implies the existence of a crouched down squash beforehand. There isn't one, but it sort of feels like there was, which is very cool. Anticipation may not be a tool that game animators can use quite as often as we'd usually like, but it is still one of the most important animation principles for this medium. It creates opportunities for players to react to opponents. It defines how our player characters' actions feel in our hands. It can even be a game design tool for creating risk and reward opportunities in combat and shaping a game's difficulty curve. So much interesting gameplay variety, all built upon one animation principle. But I think that will do it for anticipation. 3 down, 9 to go. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the rest of them, and consider supporting the show like all of these good folks. Thanks for watching, I'll see you next time.